Today we're airbrushing everything. So the downside of most chaos models is all the trim and all the little things going on, little designs or whatever. So I'm going to try to airbrush them all and work in a methodical way so that I don't have to mask and worry about overspray. So you'll see as I get into it how it can be pretty heavy-handed, but if you have a good approach to your steps, then it isn't something to worry about. So let's get into it. Now on to the actual painting. So I primed this with ebony flesh from Stynylrez, and then I did a little bit of a gray primer on the rocks and some of the highlights, but that gets overtaken here pretty quickly. But for all the fleshy demonic bits, I just use this flesh ink, and I'm just trying to hit the top sides or the most visible areas. And you can see I'm not worried about overspray or hitting some of these other areas because I'm going to be covering all that up in another step and you won't even be able to tell. Now let's start tackling all the gold trim. And you'll see this model is absolutely covered in gold trim. Now I can't think of anything worse than trying to go through all this and paint it by brush. So I'm just going to be heavy-handed here and I'm going to use the airbrush. I'm just going to knock all these areas out. The downside of airbrushing with metal paints is you have even less control than you normally do. So you typically want to do that at the earliest stage, and then you can come back in with more regular acrylic colors and you have much more control. So I'm not trying to be crazy about it, but I am just trying to get good coverage on all these star shapes, these pointy bits, all that kind of stuff. Trying to keep this panel mostly intact, but it's kind of unavoidable. I'm going to get some overspray here. Yeah, look at that. That's disgusting. I oversprayed it and it pooled. That looks terrible, but don't worry. We'll cover it up as we go. Now I know some of you really neat freak, tidy painters probably twitching right now And I'm getting gold on my flesh colored bits that I already painted, but I promise you, you won't even be able to tell. Now for the steel parts. So same thing here, I'm just gonna come in, no masking, just shooting this silver and getting it all into all these recesses, all these little joint bits, the big claws, all that kind of stuff. This is a much better way than coming in with a brush. I can just knock it out in no time at all. And if I get a little bit of silver on any of this gold stuff, kind of just blends in. Silver kind of works as a natural highlight to some of this gold. And you'll see how I kind of merge it all together here in the end. Now it's time to do the black panels. And yep, we're doing it with the airbrush. So in this first layer of black, I have the paint very thin, like dirty paint water thin. And you can see here that it doesn't cover very well, but that's the point. If I get a little bit into the gold, it's not going to be a deal breaker. I'm still going to keep the highlights intact, still going to have some shine to it, and just as good airbrush control practice. And you can work on the drying time of each spot and kind of work between each of the big panels and let it dry and come back in and just slowly build up that dark black color. A couple things to keep in mind, or some techniques to do. The first is to keep constant air going. So just push the trigger down on the airbrush so that you keep air flowing. This will help the paint dry faster once it hits the model. And as you rock back to add paint, you can see just how much paint comes out of the airbrush at a time. You can see here that I'm just keeping airflow and just barely rocking back, so I get little dabs of paint. And you can use this technique to add a little dab and just keep air flowing, and it'll dry on the model, and you just keep rocking it, just jabbing it back, just real careful. Just shoot little shots of paint onto the model and let it dry. So the other technique I use here is something I just call misting. So I'm just getting the barest amount of paint flowing out of the airbrush. I'm just misting the surface. Just trying to mist. So I was a little heavy-handed there, but now I can come back in and I can just mist the surface. Just trying to get a little bit of paint to stick, and I can slowly build it up. So just keep the air flowing so it dries, and just mist the area around it a little bit. So maybe you're asking at this point, why don't I just whip out the paintbrush and throw some black paint down? And I hope you can see here that there's still some gradient. I have some of the brown undercoat, some of the brown primer there. The black isn't like a super vibrant, thick paint, so there's some gradation there. So it just adds a little bit more visual interest, and I get to practice some of my precision with the airbrush. And if there's one thing I hate doing, is just dipping my paintbrush back and forth to the paint. And if I did like a contrast paint or something here, just a lot of surface area, a lot of dipping back and forth. And with the airbrush, you can just keep working. So that's how I like to do it. Now that I'm happy with all these black panels, I'm going to come back in with that natural gray color. I'm just going to do some brighter spot highlights. Some of the edges, some brighter halo spots. Just going to add some highlights in here. So here we are, airbrushing's all done. All right, let's bring this sucker to life. So first up, I'm going to use this magenta oil wash and all the demonic fleshy bits. And again, I'm just slapping it all over, trying to get it all into all these crevices. This magenta paint doesn't stick super well, so you definitely want it to sit on the model for a good bit. I don't really have a set time here, but 15 to 30 minutes seems to be about right. So that way it has a good chance to adhere to the model. I'm sure you'll notice that I'm not super careful with this either. If I get it on these steel parts, if I get it on this tubing, all this other stuff, you might think like, oh, I've messed up and now I've ruined all these metal parts that I've come back in and airbrushed and stuff. And you'll see that by using some of the oil washes in later steps, it kind of blends it together and pushes this magenta off of it, and it's not really a problem. Now we got to grunge this thing up. So we use this engine grease oil paint, and it's like a dark brown color and just looks like dirty, greasy engine parts. So perfect for these demonic engines. And this I just slap over everything. I leave the magenta alone. If I hit some of the magenta on some of the metal, I cover that again. And because it's a pretty thin mixture, the mineral spirits has a way of just kind of pushing that magenta off of these pipes and tubings and whatnot, like you see there. So just getting a big pot of this stuff and slapping it all over. If I had a paint bucket that I could dip it, it's almost like the idea I have here. Just covering every inch of it, every spot, forcing it in everywhere, letting it do its thing. So after I did all the engine grease across the main part of the defiler, I figured I should come check on this demonic flesh, and the magenta had a good while to sit on it as I was doing that. And so I'm able to rub a good amount of it off, but it's still a little bit too pinky for me. So tested a few times, give it a few passes, but then here between I dip it in some paint thinner and I'm able to remove a little bit more from the high spots, get more of that yellow flesh color back through. You can see here, looks pretty good. So I let that oil paint sit for a day or two, and then I put a satin varnish over the whole model, and then I did some edge highlights, painted some glowing red effects in the weapons, and this model is done. As you can see, it took me about 9 hours to paint both these models, and I would say 4.5 hours for each of these is a pretty good job. Hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you in the next one.